Welcome back for our third and final video in this series where I'm going to describe how to make the other kind of screencast that I tend to make, what I call the working example video. This kind of video is intended to mimic what students in a lecture-based class would see if the instructor is working on a whiteboard, namely handwritten notes that are unfolding in real time about some problem or discussion topic. I'm going to be describing the making of a video to give an example of a math problem being worked out. Now, other disciplines and situations should work pretty similarly to this. The tool set for working examples videos is significantly different than that for the talking head videos we talked about last time, because I need a way to record my handwriting to the computer. Now, there are many different approaches to doing this, just like there are different ways to do a talking head video. You could simply get a piece of paper and a pen and then mount a regular video camera pointing at the paper and just record yourself writing. One of my go-to math video sites on the internet, patrickgmt.com, is nothing but recordings of handwritten solutions done on pieces of paper, and they're all really good. Some document cameras have the ability to do this, and there's this piece of technology called a hover cam that also does this. You could even try more exotic approaches like mounting a GoPro camera onto your shoulder, or maybe even using a Google Glass while you work at an ordinary whiteboard. Now, another way to do this that's less exotic than a Google Glass is to have a piece of hardware that allows you to write on it while the handwriting itself shows up on a screen. Probably the best known example of this approach is the videos at Khan Academy. Some of my older screencasts do it this way too, and I was using at the time a Wacom tablet to write on top of a PDF that was displayed on the screen. Here's a link to an example of one of those old videos if you want to go check it out. Although I think those videos are okay, when you write on a tablet, the handwriting shows up elsewhere on the screen, and I was never really comfortable with doing that. So these days, I prefer to use a workflow for work examples videos that involves my iPad, so that the handwriting is going to show up in the same place where my hand is working, namely on the screen of the iPad. Also, it turns out there are some really good apps for screencasting on the iPad now that are orders of magnitude less expensive than the tablet device that I used to use for writing. I'm going to show you how my system works, again keeping in mind, just like in the last video, that this is just one system, and you should totally experiment with apps and workflows until you find something that you really like and are comfortable with. And remember, while we want to keep it good when we screencast, remember it's not all about the production quality, but mostly about the content and the approach that you take. So don't lose sight of the pedagogical goals of screencasting because of all the tools that we're introducing. With that, here is the tool set that I use for the working example screencasts. First, I'm going to need my computer and my microphone, as we discussed in the last video. Now, you might be wondering why I need a computer when I'm going to do something with the iPad. I will explain. I will also need my screencasting software, which again, in the last video I described as Camtasia for Mac. After that, I'm going to need my iPad. And I also want to use a good stylus for writing on my iPad, something that feels good in my hand and is very clear and crisp in the output it produces. I like these Boxwave EverTouch styluses because they're inexpensive and they have a metallic mesh tip that produces a clearer line than rubber tip styluses. Finally, I have two extra pieces of software that I use, both from the same company. One is an iPad app called Doceri. This is a free app for the iPad. The other piece of software is a companion program called Doceri Desktop for the Mac. The Doceri Desktop is not free, but it's important because it allows me to connect my iPad to my Mac wirelessly. So those are all the tools I need. Before I make the screencast, just as I would with a good standard lecture, I'm going to write up the example to work out in detail and actually work it completely out, so there are no surprises when I start recording. In these videos, I actually do not go from a script, unlike in the talking head videos. But I do want to have a very good sense of what I'm going to say and when I work out the example. I usually do this on paper separately and then have the paper up in front of me where I can look at it while I record. So once I've assembled my tools and written up my notes, it's finally time to record. First, in Doceri on the iPad, I'm going to open up the app and select Through a Computer. This will bring up a login page that allows me to connect my iPad wirelessly to my Mac like a remote control. Next, on the Mac, I'm going to launch Doceri Desktop. When this launches, it'll create a QR code that I can scan with my iPad's camera. Once I do that, as you can see, the iPad is now connected to my computer, and I can control what's on my computer with the iPad. What I'm going to do next is tap this button. What this will do is launch a window on my Mac that is completely blank. It's a mirror of what's happening on my iPad screen. That means if I write on the iPad screen, there's going to be a window on my Mac that is displaying a copy of it in real time. And this window, the one that's on the Mac, is what I'm going to capture with Camtasia. So now all I have to do is go to Camtasia, select Record, tell Camtasia to record the window that has that mirrored screen in it, and then hit the Record button. Once it starts recording, I can write on the iPad screen, and what shows up there also shows up on the Mac where it is being recorded by Camtasia. Now, once I'm done, I simply stop the recording, and then I can use Camtasia just as I did with the talking head video to maybe add some post-production effects and then export it to YouTube. Again, this is not the only way or necessarily even the best way to do this. Doceri on the iPad does actually have the ability to record an entire screencast just from the iPad, and so Doceri Desktop is not strictly necessary for what we're doing here. There are even some other apps for recording directly from the iPad, like Explain Everything and ScreenChomp and several others. However, there's two reasons that I prefer to use Doceri Desktop to go through the Mac and then use Camtasia. First, I've already emphasized the importance of good audio. I tend to find the iPad's internal microphone to be not as good with the audio as my Blue Yeti microphone. But unfortunately, the iPad has no USB port, at least as of October 2014 when this is being recorded. And so if you record a screencast directly from the iPad, you're stuck with the iPad's internal microphone. So if I want good audio, the only way to do that is to go through my Mac. There are some hacks to get around this, like using the iPad's camera attachment peripheral to run a USB mic into the iPad. I've tried those and ultimately found it simpler just to simply use Doceri Desktop. The second reason I'm going through my Mac is because I'm so used to using Camtasia that it's just a lot easier for me to edit the video once it's done than it is to use any other piece of software. Now, that may not be true of you. I have colleagues who do their screencasting entirely with iPad-based software, and they do a really excellent job with it. That's just my way of doing things. So that's my take on screencasting, both the why and the how. Remember that there's more than one way to do anything, and the important thing is not so much the technology itself as it is the purpose to which the technology is put, and that's to help students become expert learners through intentional modeling and thoughtful presentation of concepts. If you want to talk further, I'll be over in the discussion boards to look for your questions. So thanks a lot, and good luck in the rest of the course.